Wow, you can really see it. This has to be what our problem is. I'm really surprised I didn't notice this the first time. All of those combustion gases, the pressures, everything is coming right through there. Well, I'm finally changing these spark plugs on my 2005 Toyota 4Runner. This has the 2UZ FE 4.7 liter V8. And a couple of videos ago, I talked about how the spark plugs were all completely loose. I bet you I can loosen this by hand. Here we go, let's see. Yep, look at that. Completely loose. And I even had one of the ignition coils that was like baked and cracked open. I replaced that. Now what really led me on to all of this was replacing those valve cover gaskets, in which of course on this engine you have to remove the ignition coils, and then I chose to check on the spark plugs, which led me kind of sort of down a rabbit hole. But a few of the ignition coils had this combustion soot all over them, and I assumed that that was the combustion gases getting past the threads of the loose spark plugs. I mean, obviously that can happen and probably was happening. On some of these spark plugs, I noticed right around the little hex head there on the ceramic, it's really dark with combustion gases. I feel like, and I don't think I've dealt with this before, but I feel like spark plugs can fail internally, right where I'm looking at. So is that where the combustion gases were coming from? Were they actually coming from an internal failure of this spark plug? This is a factory Denso SK20R11, which is what I have to replace these with. Today we're replacing these regardless because I just want new plugs in there, and I'm kind of sort of hoping that the problem lies with the plug, because if it does, I think that just by simply replacing these spark plugs is going to make this engine run better. I've been talking a little bit about the fact that this engine has a slight shake to it. Now, it's nothing bad. Actually, when I go out and drive this thing, it feels so incredibly smooth. But just with all of the evidence that I've been seeing and finding, I've been craving to get in here and change these spark plugs. Just haven't had really a chance to do it. So now today's kind of like a loosey-goosey kind of a day. I'm finally getting a chance to do this. So let's get into it. I've already taken out the front two spark plugs and ignition coils on the driver's side of the engine. These two right down here. And again, going back to the evidences that I saw when I removed all this stuff, well, first of all, look at that silicone boot. That boot is completely cooked. It is fried. And I had ignition soot all over the side of this ignition coil. I thought, well, that soot is just from the gases getting past the threads and past this little crush washer and onto everything else. But let's take a look at the frontmost ignition coil and spark plug here. Now again, I don't know if these have been replaced, but look at this spark plug. There might be a little bit of ignition gases right there on the ceramic part of the spark plug. And likewise, when we look at the coil itself, we didn't have a bunch of ignition gases all over the plastic part. And when you look at the silicone end here, it does look like it's turning a little bit of color there on the end, like maybe that spark plug is kind of starting to fail, but it's nowhere near the color of the other one, which looks absolutely cooked and is brittle. So what do you guys think? Does this make sense? Do spark plugs fail internally, where combustion gases can get past that ceramic internally, past the, I guess, the seal there? It seems like that's the case here. And I've never had a vehicle with this many miles, 236,000 for those of you who don't know. I don't know the history of these spark plugs, so they need to be replaced just based off of that. But also all of these evidences I'm seeing leads me to believe, now that I've had time to sleep on it, that it's the spark plugs themselves, not necessarily, partially, not necessarily though, because of the looseness, which was bizarre, but I'm thinking it's possibly an internal failure of these plugs. Gotta be. Okay, so here's my plugs, brand new, bought them on Rock Auto. The boxes are both slightly different, but you know, they look completely legit in every way. All the printing is nice and sharp. Everything looks good. So here's the model number. It's the same exact plug that's coming out. And they do have these protective caps, and I believe that's because they are pre-gapped. Now there's what the end of that plug looks like. This is an iridium plug, of course. Definitely looks really good. Assembled in the US with foreign content. Well, it definitely looks like a good plug. So we'll go ahead and install these new ones in place of all 8 of the old ones. So to recap here, if you didn't see the previous video where I talked about these ignition coils, You can see this one with the sticker on it is a brand new one. It is a Denso original equipment manufacturer, same exact model number, part number. So let's go ahead and pull this out. This was brand spanking new. I've only run it for like maybe 30 minutes. So let's pull it out and see if we have any ignition gases on the tube, on the barrel of this ignition coil. Okay, then we have a plug, which sometimes is difficult to get off. Okay, so like I said, these are about 30 minutes of runtime. Man, I don't know if this right here is from pulling the thing out of that tube. I don't feel like it is though. And then we got some up here. We do see those ignition gases right there against the ceramic. But the one thing is these hex heads weren't super dirty. So that's what got me kind of thinking, well, wait a minute. If ignition gases were getting past the threads, past the crush washer, it would have coated everything up here, including this metal here. But really all we see is the ceramic coated there, and then the entire ignition coil, including the spark plug boot. So what makes sense, especially with the evidences we're seeing here, these spark plugs have failed internally, which is pretty insane to me. I mean, these have to be some old plugs. Could these potentially be original? Looking at that section there, could that be right there? Well, here's the entire driver's side in order, front to back. And this is that last ignition coil. You can see that spark plug boot is also pretty fried. It is very, very brown. It's cooked, essentially. And looking at the spark plug, you can see, again, we have that telltale sign of an internal failure, I'm going to call it. I'm going to start installing the brand new plugs, starting with the rear here on the driver's side. And one thing I want to make note of, because I've had plenty of comments talking about anti-seize on the threads. From every bit of research I've been doing, I do not think that is a good idea. These types of spark plugs that are coated with this silver coating, this coating already has that anti-seize ability built in. Not only that, when you apply anti-seize, well, now you might be over torquing the spark plugs because they're now lubed. And when you over torque spark plugs in an aluminum head, you're just asking for trouble. So I will not be applying anti-seize to these spark plugs, and you should really do your research before you think about doing that to yours. Now, another good rule of thumb is to make sure that you are tightening these first completely by hand. Okay, it's obviously vitally important that we torque these spark plugs down to spec. Now, that being said, I don't know exactly what the spec is. All I know is that it's an aluminum head. Usually it's somewhere around 13 or so foot-pounds. I have my 1/4 inch torque wrench here, and I have it set to 132 inch-pounds, which is 11 foot-pounds. So I'm kind of under, and I'm doing that because, again, I don't know how accurate my torque wrench is. I don't want to overdo it on these. So I'm kind of feeling that and feeling like 11 foot-pounds is plenty. There we go. Man, that's scary. All of the driver's side plugs have now been swapped out. Everything's torqued. On the passenger side here, you can probably tell the air filter box is gone, the ducting there. And that's so I can get easier access to all of these ignition coils and ultimately the spark plugs. All right, I'm gonna jump in here and just take the first one out. This one looks really good. Not seeing any extra ignition, exhaust gases, nothing like that. Well, here's all four from the passenger side, front to back. And just like the driver's side, these middle two are the main culprits here. Looking at the ignition coil, you can see that that boot is so burnt. It is crispy. And now when looking at the actual spark plug, look at that. This has to be the worst one so far. You can literally see exactly where those exhaust gases are coming from. And it's that space right in between that hex head nut and that ceramic. So I think we figured out a pretty major problem, which is very easily fixed, thankfully. Now coming over to the second one back, you can see this spark plug boot is brown and cooked as well. And what do we have here? Well, there is a lot of evidence of those combustion gases coming right through that area there. Wow, you can really see it. This has to be what our problem is. I'm really surprised I didn't notice this the first time. It makes so much sense. Although these spark plugs were unbelievably loose, the actual metal of the spark plug just above the threads was clean. All of those combustion gases, the pressures, everything is coming right through there. There is perfect evidence of it, and I can't wait to get these new spark plugs swapped in. Well, to me, this really proves the point. When we see the ignition coils that are nice and clean, the boots are clean, the spark plug doesn't have a whole lot of staining right there, although this does have some. But then we come over to these ones. When I first took these out of the vehicle, they were completely covered in soot. You can see the boot is fried, and we can see we have a lot of ignition gases coming right through there. That's gotta be the area of failure right there. Again, coming over to the second one from the front, we see the same thing. A lot of those combustion gases seemingly coming through a failure point in the spark plug right here. And then we also get our cooked boot, and this was completely caked in soot as well. And then we come to the front one, and while we do see a little bit of staining, it's not super bad, though I am glad to be replacing this. We also have a cleaner ignition coil, as well as the boot, which isn't brittle. It's nice and malleable and doesn't look cooked. So, does that confirm it? What do you guys think? I think that these spark plugs have pretty much all failed, with the exception being the two in the middle on both sides. For some reason, the two middle ones seem to have failed the most on both the driver and passenger side. So I'd like to know what you guys think about all this. Comment down below. Let's start the discussion talking about spark plugs and how exactly they can fail. There's the part number SK20R11, which is exactly what's coming out of the vehicle. Okay, I wanted to show this most forward spark plug. This is the front spark plug on the passenger side, and you can see the beginnings of the failure there. Each one of those little dark spots, and you can kind of see how it's allowing exhaust gases to come through. So that right there, being that it's a little bit lighter and a little bit less, it's easier to see the failure. How weird is that? And looking at the rearmost spark plug, this is probably the cleanest one, but you can see the same pattern there, and you can see where those exhaust gases are starting to come out. So I mentioned in another video that I bought 2 of these Denso ignition coils. Let me open this thing up. Here it is out of the bag. You can see the sticker on top. It says made in Japan. There's the part number. And interestingly, you can also see it says Denso made in Japan right there, with what looks like something that was taken off of the top. Now I have a suspicion, if we look at the Toyota versions there, look what's right there on the top. You can see, obviously it says Toyota and the part number. Then it says Denso made in Japan. This brand new ignition coil literally says the exact same thing, and it looks like they removed the Toyota and the part number. On this driver's side, you can see I replaced the third one back, and that's because that one had to be replaced. And so I've decided on this one, which is the passenger side, also the third one back. And the reason why is just because this boot looks the most burnt. You can see the whole thing is brown, and it gets even black right there at the tip. Now obviously I can replace the boot for $5, but I figured this would just be a good option, being the exact opposite from the driver's side. And now I have a working backup ignition coil that I can keep with me in the truck on long trips. So I'll go ahead and swap in this new one. Fits like a new ignition coil. The passenger side's now done. You can see that brand new ignition coil, the third one back, which is just like this driver's side, brand new third one back. So that should even each other out if for some reason those sparks are stronger than all the rest, but I think it's gonna be just fine. I did check the oil to make sure that we were full, and we are. It's interesting. It definitely feels smoother, but it seems like it's idling kind of high right at the beginning here. I almost wonder if I have some kind of a vacuum leak somewhere. It's definitely smoother than it was before, so that's a very, very good thing. I still do, however, sense the slightest amount of kind of shimmy, just slight. Probably nothing more than what's usual. I am curious if I need to replace any more of these ignition coils. I am driving this thing around, and definitely seems to be driving really good, but it kind of always has. I am in 4-low right now. I just feel like I don't need it, but you kind of do have to engage that thing every once in a while so it you know, lubricates itself and works everything out. You don't engage the 4-low very often, they can seize up, and that's a pretty big deal to fix. All right, we are in 4-low like I said, so we're going up this hill. Now this hill is pretty steep. It doesn't look like it on camera, but it is. 4Runner did it without any issue, no problem whatsoever. I can hear somewhat of a clunking in the front suspension. I don't know exactly what it is. It's maybe a bushing in the control arm or something. We're heading kind of back down the hill, and I'm going to try to make this loop right here, which is pretty tight. But this 4Runner is small. So we have a little bit of an advantage over my Suburbans. Should be able to make this turn just fine. Yep. Now this is where it gets a little dicey. This is very, very tight. But again, advantage 4Runner. Wow, that is cool. This thing is so cool. I've always wanted a 4Runner. Well, should have expected this was a very simple task for the 4Runner. Yeah, no problem. Well, I can tell you right now, I've taken this 4Runner up this hill twice now, today and one other time, and both times it had absolutely no issues whatsoever. The first time it was a little bit wet too, but 4-low, and these tires are relatively new. They are Cooper Discovery AT3. These tires were on it when I bought it. They seem to be pretty good, though I don't have many miles on them. I'm just talking about my experience here on these hills. I can tell you what sounds suspect though, is that air conditioning compressor. You can probably hear that thing. It sounds rather loud. It does cool. I do have air conditioning, but it's just a little loud. So it looks like I'm gonna have to inspect the suspension. I'm not exactly sure which side it's on. I just can hear a clunking. I'm assuming it's probably some bushing somewhere. Nice. Grassy hill, 4-low, no issues. All right, well, I can say this thing is idling extremely smooth. I'm in drive right now, foot on the brake, idling nice and smooth. And just to try to prove the point here about how smooth this thing is running right now, I'm hoping I can let you listen to this. It sounds like a sewing machine. Definitely feels nice and smooth. Well, gosh, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. I mean, we got to see spark plugs that looked like they failed internally. So that's another thing you need to check with your spark plugs, because if you see those weird kind of lines of ignition gases, I don't know, that was a weird thing. I've never seen that on a spark plug before, but that probably means that those spark plugs need to be replaced. This thing right now is running and idling really, really smoothly, better than it has since I bought it. Now, I don't have a whole heck of a lot of miles and all that stuff on this thing, but I have driven it around my land a few times, and yeah, it's running the best it's ran so far, which is really promising. There are some things I still want to do as far as tune-up goes. I do want to clean that mass airflow sensor. I'm going to do that very soon. I also want to start running the Valvoline Restore and Protect oil. I've heard some really, really good things on that. If you haven't heard of that, look it up. It's supposed to clean the internals of your engine, even down to the piston rings, like factory fresh. So I'm gonna start running that for probably the time being. I am curious about replacing more of the ignition coils. I am curious if I may need to start looking at replacing some injectors too, but we'll see. So far though, it runs, and it seems like it runs really good. You wanna see what I've been doing so far? Take a look at the seat. You want to sit in it?
Beautiful.
Because remember, last time the seat was all ripped up and...
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it like installed.
Yeah, and then obviously the dash, you remember the dash, how bad it was?
Yes.
So the dash is now fixed, looks new. I cleaned the steering wheel really good. All the staining that was down here in the carpet is now gone.
And it's kind of covered up too a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, you're only really seeing just the tiniest bit, but
What's
hopefully it's
happening
not going to
this?
smell.
I don't like this.
Oh yeah, that's going to be replaced.
Is it ready for me to drive?
Almost. I just replaced all the spark plugs. So I was just telling them how good it's actually running and idling right now.
You did the spark
That's always
plugs,
good.
right?
Yeah, spark plugs. And I changed this ignition coil actually last time, but I did the exact same thing on this side, the opposite one. But I'm still kind of wondering if I need to change, you know, all of the ignition coils or maybe just the other two middle ones, because the ends are all still good. I don't know why.
Why not? Just change it all. Change the whole thing.
Well, okay, hold on. They're $50 a piece.
Well, let's just see how these go.
Oh, and I put a sticker on today. A sticker that I already had, which shows and proves that the timing belt has been changed back in 2019, December, at 200,025 miles. So we only have 236 right now on this thing, so the timing belt should be pretty good for a little bit. Well, that's all for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. It really helps this video and the channel. If you've watched this far and you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. And if you do hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell icon, which then notifies you every time I make an upload. For One Road, I'm Jimmy, and I will see you in the next one.